He walked into the lobby wearing jeans and a simple polo shirt, carrying a worn leather backpack. Nothing flashy, nothing demanding attention. Just a man checking into a hotel like thousands of others do every day. But the manager took one look at him and decided he didn't belong. Decided he looked suspicious. Decided he needed to be questioned, controlled, removed. The manager called the police on a paying guest without cause, without justification, without wondering who he might be dealing with. He stood there smirking as officers arrived, convinced his judgment was sound, his authority absolute, his control complete. But he made one critical error. He never asked the guest's name, never looked at the reservation, never considered that the man standing calmly in his lobby wasn't just a guest. He was the owner, the majority shareholder, the man who controlled every hotel in the chain. And by the time corporate called, by the time the truth emerged, the manager's career was already over. Destroyed not by the owner's anger, but by his own arrogance. You are about to witness what happens when someone with a little power meets someone with all of it, and realizes far too late that authority means nothing when you've just humiliated the person who signs your paycheck. The Grandview Plaza Hotel in downtown Chicago was not the most expensive hotel in the city, but it was certainly upscale. 4 stars, business travelers, wealthy tourists. The kind of place where rooms started at $350 per night, and the lobby featured marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and leather furniture arranged in conversation clusters. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in October, and the lobby was moderately busy. Check-ins were happening at the front desk. Bellhops wheeled luggage carts toward the elevators. A few guests sat in the lounge area with coffee or cocktails, scrolling through phones or working on laptops. The revolving door spun, admitting a man in his mid-40s. He was tall, approximately 6'1", with a lean build that suggested he stayed active. He had dark hair graying at the temples, a neatly trimmed beard, and wore wire-rimmed glasses. His clothing was casual but quality: dark jeans, a charcoal gray polo shirt, brown leather loafers that were well worn but expensive. He carried a leather backpack that looked like it had traveled extensively. Scuffed corners, worn straps, but still well maintained. Everything about his appearance said, comfortable, unpretentious, someone who didn't need to broadcast wealth. His name was James Chen, though the front desk staff didn't know that yet. He walked across the marble lobby floor with the easy confidence of someone who had been in hundreds of hotels and knew exactly how they worked. He approached the front desk, where a young clerk named Sarah was managing check-ins. Sarah smiled professionally. "Good afternoon, sir." "Checking in?" "Yes," James said, his voice pleasant but unremarkable. "Reservation under Chen." Sarah typed on her computer. "James Chen, reservation for 5 nights." "That's correct." "Perfect. I have you in a King Deluxe room on the 7th floor. May I see your ID and credit card?" James pulled out his wallet, a simple leather bifold, nothing designer, and handed over his driver's license and an American Express card. Not the Centurion card, just a regular platinum card. Middle tier for someone who traveled frequently. Sarah processed the information, made key cards, and explained the hotel amenities. James listened politely, asked about the gym hours, and thanked her. The entire interaction was professional, smooth, unremarkable. Just another business traveler checking into just another hotel. But across the lobby, watching this interaction with narrowed eyes, was the hotel's general manager. His name was Richard Thornton, and he had been managing the Grandview Plaza for 3 years. He was 51 years old, white, with the kind of face that had settled into permanent disapproval. He wore an expensive suit, Armani, charcoal with subtle pinstripes, and a burgundy tie. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was slicked back with too much product. He wore a Rolex Datejust and a college ring from a state school he'd attended 30 years ago, but never stopped mentioning. Richard believed in standards. He believed in maintaining the hotel's upscale image. He believed in screening guests to ensure they were appropriate for the establishment, a belief that had led to several complaints over the years, but never quite enough to get him fired. And right now, watching James Chen check in wearing jeans and carrying a backpack, Richard decided that this guest didn't meet his standards. He walked across the lobby and positioned himself near the front desk, arms crossed, watching. Sarah handed James his key cards. "You're all set, Mr. Chen. Room 7, Wistine. The elevators are just past the lounge area. Is there anything else I can help you with? No, thank you, James said, pocketing the key cards. As he turned toward the elevators, Richard stepped into his path. Excuse me, sir, Richard said, his tone polite but with an edge. I'm Richard Thornton, the general manager. May I have a word with you? James stopped, looked at Richard calmly. Of course. What can I help you with? I noticed you checking in. Would you mind showing me your reservation confirmation? James's eyebrows rose slightly. I just checked in. The desk clerk verified my reservation. I understand that, sir, but I like to personally verify our guests, especially during busy periods. If you could just show me your confirmation email or booking number. It was an unusual request, unnecessary, intrusive, and clearly targeted. Sarah, still at the front desk, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. James remained calm. My reservation was confirmed by your front desk. I've been given key cards. Is there a problem? No problem at all, sir. Just standard procedure. If you could show me your confirmation. James studied Richard for a moment, then pulled out his phone. He scrolled briefly and showed Richard an email. A Grandview Hotel's reservation confirmation for James Chen, 5 nights, prepaid. Richard looked at it, then looked at James. And this is your credit card? He gestured to the Amex James had used. Yes. May I see it again? James's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Awareness, perhaps, that this wasn't standard procedure. But he pulled out his wallet and showed Richard the credit card. The name on it matched his ID, James Chen. Richard examined it like he was looking for a forgery. And what's the purpose of your stay in Chicago, Mr. Chen? Business. What kind of business? Consulting, James said, his tone still patient but cooling slightly. Consulting for what? That's confidential. Richard's jaw tightened. He didn't like that. Answer. Mr. Chen, I run a secure establishment. I need to know who's staying in my hotel. Your front desk has my information. My ID has been verified. My credit card has been processed. I'm not sure what else you need. I need to ensure that all our guests are appropriate for this hotel, Richard said, and the subtext was clear. You don't look appropriate. Several other guests in the lobby had started to notice the interaction. A couple sitting in the lounge area was watching. The bellhop near the elevators had paused, paying attention. James remained utterly calm. I've checked in. I have my room key. If there's a specific issue with my reservation, I'm happy to discuss it. Otherwise, I'd like to go to my room. The issue, Richard said, his voice dropping to a lower, more threatening tone, is that I don't believe you belong here. I think there's been some kind of mistake or fraud, and I'm going to need you to wait here while I verify your information more thoroughly. You've already verified my information, James said quietly. Not to my satisfaction. James looked at Richard for a long moment. Then he said very calmly, Are you refusing to honor a confirmed prepaid reservation? I'm exercising my authority as general manager to ensure the safety and security of this hotel and its guests. By questioning a guest who has provided valid identification and payment? By questioning someone who looks suspicious, Richard snapped, and there it was, the real reason laid bare. James looked suspicious, not because of anything he'd done, not because of any behavior, but because of how Richard perceived him. Asian man, casual clothes, backpack, not flashy enough, not fitting Richard's mental image of who belonged at an upscale hotel. The lobby had gone quiet. People were staring now. Sarah at the front desk looked mortified. A bellhop was whispering to a colleague. Several guests had their phones out, though it wasn't clear if they were recording or just texting about the scene. James took a slow breath. Mr. Thornton, I've checked in. I've provided all required information. I'm going to my room now. If you have concerns about my reservation, you can contact corporate to verify it. He moved to step around Richard. Richard grabbed his arm. It wasn't a hard grab, not violent, but it was physical contact, a manager putting hands on a guest. The lobby seemed to freeze. James looked down at Richard's hand on his arm, then up at Richard's face. His expression was still calm, but his voice dropped to ice. Remove your hand. Now. Richard hesitated, then let go. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. I'm calling security, Richard said. In fact, I'm calling the police. You're trespassing. I'm not trespassing. I have a reservation. I've checked in. A reservation I'm canceling right now, Richard said. He turned to Sarah at the desk. Cancel Mr. Chen's reservation immediately. Refund his payment. He's no longer welcome at this hotel. Sarah looked panicked. Mr. Thornton, he's already checked in. His room, cancel it, Richard barked. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. James stood very still, watching Richard make the call with an expression that was impossible to read. Yes, I need police at the Grandview Plaza Hotel, 445 North Michigan Avenue. I have a trespasser refusing to leave the premises. Richard paused, listening. No, he's not violent, but he's refusing to leave, and I need him removed. Another pause. Yes, I'll wait for officers to arrive. He ended the call and looked at James with satisfaction. The police are on their way. You can either leave now voluntarily, or you can be escorted out. James didn't move. He just looked at Richard, then around the lobby at all the people watching, guests, staff, everyone witnessing this humiliation. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call of his own. Hi, it's James, he said quietly into the phone. I'm at the Grandview Plaza in Chicago. I need you to contact Ellen immediately and have her call this property. There's a situation. He paused. No, I'm fine. Just make the call. Thanks. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Richard smirked. Calling your lawyer? That's not going to help you. James didn't respond. He just stood there, calm and still, waiting. 2 minutes later, police sirens were audible outside. Richard looked triumphant. 2 Chicago Police Department officers entered through the revolving doors. Officer Maria Santos, 34 years old, with 8 years on the force, and Officer Kevin Walsh, 27, 3 years as a patrol officer. They both looked like they'd rather be handling literally anything else, domestic calls, traffic accidents, even paperwork, than a hotel manager dispute. Officer Santos approached Richard, who immediately positioned himself as the authority figure. Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm Richard Thornton, general manager of this hotel. This man, he gestured to James, is trespassing and refusing to leave. Officer Santos looked at James, who stood calmly with his backpack on his shoulder. Sir, what's your name? James Chen. Mr. Chen, the manager says you're trespassing. Can you tell us what's happening? I checked into the hotel about 10 minutes ago, James said evenly. I provided valid identification, a credit card, and received room keys. After I checked in, Mr. Thornton approached me, questioned my presence, and then decided to cancel my reservation and call the police. Officer Santos looked at Richard. He checked in. He has a reservation. He had a reservation, Richard corrected, which I canceled because he doesn't belong here. What do you mean doesn't belong here? He looks suspicious. I have the right to refuse service to anyone who doesn't meet our establishment's standards. Officer Walsh, who had been silent until now, frowned. What standards did he violate? That's between me and my hotel policy, Richard said defensively. Officer Santos sighed. Mr. Thornton, did this man do anything illegal? Did he threaten anyone? Cause a disturbance? Damage property? No, but then what are we doing here? Officer Santos looked tired. Sir, if he checked in, paid for a room, and has keys, he's not trespassing. He's a guest. You can't call the police because you don't like how someone looks. I can refuse service. You can refuse service before someone becomes a guest, Officer Walsh interrupted. But once they've checked in and paid, you can't just kick them out without cause. That's called breach of contract. Richard's face was reddening. I'm the manager of this hotel. I have the authority. You have the authority to manage your hotel, Officer Santos agreed. But you don't have the authority to file false police reports. Was this a security concern or a personal judgment? It's a security. Concern! Based on what? Officer Santos pressed. Has Mr. Chen committed a crime? Is he wanted? Is there a warrant? No, but then this isn't a police matter. Officer Santos looked at James. Sir, do you still want to stay here, or would you prefer to go to another hotel? James considered. I'd like to stay. I have a confirmed reservation. I haven't done anything wrong. Officer Santos nodded. Mr. Thornton, here's what's going to happen. Mr. Chen is staying. If you refuse to honor his prepaid reservation, he can sue your hotel for breach of contract. If you continue to harass him, he can file a complaint for discrimination. The police are not going to remove a paying guest who's done nothing wrong. Richard looked like he might explode. You're taking his side? We're not taking sides. We're telling you the law. You called us for a trespass that isn't a trespass. That's a misuse of emergency services. Officer Santos was losing patience. Is there anything else? Or can we clear? Before Richard could respond, Officer Walsh's radio crackled. A dispatcher's voice came through, professional but urgent. Unit 3 to 7, please stand by for a supervisor contact. Officer Walsh frowned and keyed his radio. Unit 3 to 7 standing by. A moment later, a different voice came through. Deeper, older, clearly someone higher up the chain. Unit 3 to 7, this is Sergeant Morrison. What's your status at the Grandview Plaza? Officer Walsh looked confused. We're Code 4, Sarge. Hotel manager called about a trespasser, but it's not a valid call. Guest checked in, has a room. Manager just doesn't want him here. We were about to clear. There was a pause. Then, do not leave that location. I need both officers to stand by. And I need you to identify the guest in question. Name? Officer Walsh looked at James. Sir, what's your full name? James William Chen. Officer Walsh repeated it into his radio. Another pause, longer this time. Then Sergeant Morrison's voice came back, and there was something different in his tone. Officers, you are to remain at that location. The individual you're speaking with is not the problem. I repeat, James Chen is not the problem. Stand by for further instructions. Do not allow the hotel manager to take any action against Mr. Chen. Officer Santos and Walsh exchanged confused glances. Richard looked triumphant. See? They're investigating him. That's not what he said, Officer Santos said slowly. She looked at James with new interest. Sir, who are you? James just smiled slightly. I'm a guest at this hotel. That's not all you are, Officer Santos said. Before anyone could continue, the front desk phone rang. Sarah answered it, her voice shaky. Grandview Plaza, this is Sarah. Yes, he's here. One moment. She put the call on hold and looked at Richard with wide eyes. Mr. Thornton, it's Ellen Pritchard from corporate. She says it's urgent. Ellen Pritchard, the name meant something. She was the Senior Vice President of Operations for Grandview Hotels, overseeing all North American properties. She reported directly to the CEO. Richard frowned, but walked to the desk and picked up the phone. This is Richard Thornton. He listened. His expression changed rapidly. Confusion, then disbelief, then horror. I didn't know. He didn't identify himself. I was following standard security protocols. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Yes, ma'am. He hung up, his hand shaking slightly. Officer Santos was watching him closely. Mr. Thornton, what did corporate say? Richard didn't answer. He was staring at James Chen, who stood calmly in the middle of the lobby, backpack still on his shoulder, expression neutral. Sarah, still at the front desk, had been frantically typing on her computer. She'd pulled up the reservation details, looked deeper into the guest profile, cross-referenced the corporate directory. Her face went pale. Oh my God! What? Officer Walsh asked. Sarah looked at James, then at Richard, then back at her computer screen. Mr. Chen, James Chen, he's listed in the system as, oh my God. As what? Officer Santos pressed. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He's listed as the primary contact for corporate ownership. She scrolled, he's on the board of directors for Chen Holdings, the parent company that owns Grandview Hotels. And according to this, Chen Holdings has a 73% controlling interest in the chain. The lobby, already quiet, went dead silent. Officer Santos looked at James with new understanding. You own this hotel? Not personally, James said calmly. My family's investment firm owns controlling interest in the chain. I'm the managing director. He looked at Richard Thornton, who had gone from red to gray. I visit properties incognito several times a year, James continued, his voice still calm, still quiet, but now carrying weight. I check in as a regular guest. I see how the staff treats people. I see how managers exercise their authority. I see who belongs, he stressed the word, at our hotels. Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. Mr. Thornton, James said, in the 10 minutes I've been in this lobby, you've questioned my presence without cause, demanded information beyond standard check-in procedures, physically grabbed me, canceled my reservation, and called the police on a paying guest who had done nothing wrong. Can you explain why? Richard stammered. I thought security protocols. What security protocols? James asked. What did I do that was suspicious? Richard couldn't answer, because the answer was nothing. James had done nothing suspicious. He'd simply existed in a way that didn't match Richard's prejudices. Officer Santos cleared her throat. Mr. Chen, do you want to file any charges? Assault for the physical contact? False report for the 911 call? James considered. No, I just want answers. Mr. Thornton, I need you to tell me honestly. Why did you decide I didn't belong here? Richard looked around the lobby, at the guests watching, at the staff frozen in place, at the police officers, at the man he'd just humiliated, who turned out to own the entire building. Richard swallowed hard. I made a judgment call. You weren't dressed like our typical guests. You had a backpack. You looked casual. I thought maybe you were using someone else's reservation, or there was fraud, or I wasn't white enough, James said quietly. The words hung in the air. I didn't say that, Richard protested weakly. You didn't have to, James said. I've been doing these incognito visits for 5 years, Mr. Thornton. I've checked into 12 different properties in this chain. Do you know how many times I've been questioned like this? Richard didn't answer. 3 times, James said. 3 out of 12. And interestingly, all 3 times were at properties managed by people who had similar complaints filed against them. Complaints about selective enforcement, about treating guests of color differently, about making assumptions based on appearance. He pulled out his phone and made another call. Ellen? Yes, I'm still at the Chicago property. Can you conference in HR? We're going to need to discuss Mr. Thornton's employment status. Within 15 minutes, the lobby of the Grandview Plaza had transformed into an impromptu corporate tribunal. Ellen Pritchard, the SVP of Operations, was on speakerphone. Michael Torres from HR was on the line. Robert Kim, the regional director who oversaw all Midwest properties, had been in the area and was en route. ETA 10 minutes. The police officers remained, now serving as witnesses rather than responders. Officer Santos had called her sergeant to update him on the situation. Sergeant Morrison had requested that they stay and document everything for the hotel's records in their own report, in case Richard tried to claim he'd been wrongly terminated. Richard Thornton sat in a chair in the hotel's back office, his arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that his career was over. James Chen stood in the office, calm as ever, while Ellen Pritchard's voice came through the speakerphone. Mr. Thornton, Ellen said, her voice professional but cold, I need you to walk me through your decision-making process. Why did you question Mr. Chen? Richard's voice shook. I was concerned about security. He didn't look like our usual clientele. What does our usual clientele look like? Ellen asked. Professional, business attire, expensive luggage. Mr. Chen had a leather backpack that retails for $800, Ellen said. He was wearing designer jeans and a polo shirt. His appearance was perfectly appropriate for a business casual traveler. So, I'll ask again, what didn't look right to you? Richard couldn't answer without admitting the truth. Michael Torres from HR spoke up. Mr. Thornton, I'm looking at your file. You've had 4 formal complaints filed against you in the past 2 years. 2 were for making Asian guests show additional identification. 1 was for questioning a black guest's ability to pay. 1 was for calling security on a Hispanic family because you assumed they were lost and belonged at a different hotel. Richard's face was ashen. Those were all misunderstandings. Were they? Michael's voice was sharp. Because I'm seeing a pattern. You seem to have very different standards for who belongs at this hotel depending on what they look like. That's not true. It is true, James interrupted. Mr. Thornton, I checked in under my real name. My reservation was in the system. If you'd looked at it, really looked at it, you would have seen that my account is flagged as VIP corporate. You would have seen that I've stayed at Grandview Properties dozens of times. You would have known exactly who I was, but you didn't look. You just saw what I looked like and decided I didn't belong. Richard had no defense. Robert Kim arrived 20 minutes later, slightly out of breath from rushing over. He was a Korean-American man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He'd been the regional director for 8 years and had a reputation for not tolerating discrimination in any form. "James," Robert said, shaking hands warmly, "I'm sorry about this. If I'd known you were visiting Chicago, I would have prepared the staff." "That defeats the purpose," James said. "I visit incognito specifically so I can see how guests are really treated when staff don't know they're being watched." Robert nodded grimly. "And what did you see?" "I saw a manager who profiled me based on appearance, who escalated a normal check-in into a police matter, who physically grabbed me, and who canceled my reservation without cause. I saw staff members who were clearly uncomfortable with his behavior but didn't intervene. I saw other guests filming the interaction on their phones, which means this is probably already on social media." Robert winced. "Is it viral?" James pulled out his phone and did a quick search. "Grandview Hotel manager calls police on owner" is trending on Twitter. "There are 3 videos I can find so far." He showed Robert the phone. One video had 45,000 views. Another had 82,000. The comments were brutal. Another example of racist hotel manager power tripping. "The way he grabbed that man's arm. File charges. Imagine calling the cops on your own boss because he's Asian. This is why I don't stay at Grandview hotels. They have a history of this." Robert closed his eyes briefly. "James, what do you want to do?" "I want Mr. Thornton terminated immediately," James said, his voice calm but firm. "Not just for what he did to me, but for the pattern of behavior documented in his file. He's a liability to this company, and a threat to every person of color who checks in here thinking they'll be treated with dignity." "Done," Robert said immediately. He looked at Richard. "Mr. Thornton, your employment with Grandview Hotels is terminated effective immediately. You're to leave the property now. You'll receive termination paperwork within 3 business days. Given the circumstances, specifically the discrimination and the false police report, you're being terminated for cause, which means no severance package." Richard looked like he might argue, might beg, might try to explain, but he just stood up, his shoulders slumped, and walked toward the door. "One more thing," James said. Richard stopped. "You're not to speak to the media about this. You're not to post on social media about this. If you do, we'll release the full documentation of your complaint's history and the videos of today's incident. Do you understand?" Richard nodded without turning around and left. Officer Santos, who had been witnessing all of this, approached James. "Mr. Chen, are you sure you don't want to file charges? Assault for the physical contact? False report?" James considered. "No, his career is over. That's consequence enough." Officer Santos nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry you went through this. You shouldn't have to prove who you are just to check into a hotel." "No one should," James agreed. The officers left. Robert, Ellen, and Michael spent the next hour discussing damage control, press releases, staff retraining, social media response, policy reviews. But James wasn't interested in the PR strategy. He was interested in fixing the system. "Ellen," he said, "I want a full audit of complaint records across all properties. I want to know which managers have patterns of discrimination. I want them retrained or removed." "Absolutely," Ellen agreed. "Michael, I want updated diversity training for all management, not the standard online module. Real training, in person, with consequences for failing to demonstrate competency." "I'll start developing it immediately," Michael said. "And Robert, I want you personally overseeing the hiring of Thornton's replacement. I want someone who understands that luxury hospitality means treating everyone with dignity, not just people who look like they stepped out of a Brooks Brothers catalog." "Understood." James looked around the office. "Gentlemen, Ms. Pritchard, I appreciate your quick response. But the fact that this happened at all means we have systemic problems. Fix them." He stood up, grabbed his backpack, and left the office. Back in the lobby, Sarah was still at the front desk, looking shaken. She saw James and immediately stood up. "Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. When Mr. Thornton started questioning you, I knew it was wrong, but he's my boss and I didn't know how to—" "Sarah," James interrupted gently, "you did your job correctly. You checked me in professionally. You verified my information. You were polite. The problem wasn't you. But I didn't stand up for you. You're in a difficult position," James acknowledged. When your manager is abusing his authority, speaking up can cost you your job. I understand that. But I hope going forward, you and the rest of the staff will feel empowered to report discrimination when you see it. We've set up anonymous reporting systems. Use them. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. I will. Thank you. James walked to the elevators. As he waited, several guests approached him. A middle-aged black woman touched his arm gently. Sir, I saw what happened. I recorded part of it. I was so angry on your behalf. Thank you, James said. I've been treated like that too, she continued. Not here, but at other hotels, other places, people looking at you like you don't belong just because of what you look like. It's exhausting. It is, James agreed. I'm sorry you've experienced that. But you owned the place, the woman said, her voice rising with satisfaction. That manager's face when he found out. Best thing I've seen all year. James smiled slightly. I wish the reversal hadn't been necessary. I wish he'd just treated me like a person from the beginning. The elevator arrived. James stepped in and pressed 7. As the doors closed, he caught his reflection in the mirrored wall. A tired man in jeans and a polo shirt, carrying a worn backpack, who had just been humiliated in the lobby of a hotel he owned, who had remained calm throughout, had called the right people, had waited for the system to correct itself, who could have revealed his identity immediately, could have screamed, I own this hotel, could have threatened and intimidated, but who had chosen to let the manager dig his own grave, to let the truth emerge naturally, to let the consequences unfold without his anger driving them. James had learned a long time ago that power didn't need to be loud, it just needed to be patient. The next morning, James Chin sat in the Grandview Plaza's restaurant eating breakfast, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, excellent coffee, while reading the news on his tablet. The story had exploded overnight. Multiple news outlets had picked it up. Chicago Tribune. Hotel manager fired after calling, police on owner. CNN Business. Grandview Hotels, owner experiences racial profiling at his own property. NBC, Chicago. Viral video shows hotel manager discriminating against Asian guests who turned out to own the chain. The videos from the lobby had been viewed millions of times collectively. The hashtag #WaGrandviewIncident was trending. People were sharing their own stories of being profiled at hotels, restaurants, stores. Robert Kim approached James's table. Mind if I sit? Please, James gestured to the chair across from him. Robert sat down with his own coffee. I wanted to update you on what we're doing. We've issued a public statement apologizing to you and to any other guests who've experienced discrimination at our properties. We've announced mandatory retraining for all management. We're conducting the audit you requested of complaint records across all hotels. Good, James said. We've also permanently flagged your account in our system, Robert continued. Not just as VIP corporate, but with a note that you conduct incognito inspections and that staff should be prepared for unannounced visits from ownership. James frowned. That defeats the purpose. If staff know I might be anyone checking in, they'll treat everyone better just in case. But if they know what I look like or have my photo flagged, they'll just treat me well and continue profiling others. You're right, Robert acknowledged. What do you suggest? Hire secret shoppers, James said. Diverse secret shoppers. Have people of different races, different genders, different ages, different economic presentations check in without identifying themselves and report on how they're treated. Make it random enough that staff never know who might be evaluating them. That's expensive. Discrimination lawsuits are more expensive, James said. So is the PR damage from viral videos. Invest in preventing the problem rather than managing the crisis. Robert nodded. I'll propose it to the board. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Robert said, Can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. How many times has this happened to you? Not just at hotels, but in general? James considered. More times than I can count. Airport security. Restaurants where I'm told there's a long wait while I watch white families get seated immediately. Stores where I'm followed by security. Banks where I'm questioned about large deposits. Every Asian American I know has stories like this. Every person of color does. Does it ever stop hurting? No, James said honestly. You develop thicker skin. You learn to stay calm because getting angry just confirms their stereotypes. You learn to document everything. You learn to have the right phone number on speed dial. But it doesn't stop hurting. Robert, who had his own experiences with discrimination, nodded in understanding. The difference for me, James continued, is that I have power. I can fire a manager who discriminates against me. I can change company policy. Most people can't. They just have to swallow the humiliation and move on. That's what I'm trying to change, not just for myself, but for every guest who checks in and deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of what they look like. You're doing good work, Robert said. I'm trying, James said, but yesterday showed me we still have a long way to go. After breakfast, James spent the day conducting his actual inspection of the hotel. He reviewed maintenance records, spot-checked rooms, talked to housekeeping staff, observed operations. He found several things that needed improvement, but nothing as egregious as Richard Thornton's behavior. The staff treated him with extreme deference now. Everyone knew who he was. But James made a point of being kind, asking questions, listening to concerns. He promoted a front desk supervisor who had been overlooked for management positions despite stellar performance. He increased wages for housekeeping staff after learning they were being paid below market rate. He allocated funds for facility upgrades the previous management had deferred. He also spent an hour with Sarah, the front desk clerk who had checked him in, talking about her career goals and offering mentorship. You handled a difficult situation yesterday, James told her. Your manager was wrong, and you knew it. But speaking up could have cost you your job. I understand why you stayed quiet, but going forward, I want you to know you can report discrimination safely. The company has your back. Thank you, Sarah said. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you do the incognito visits? You could just send corporate auditors. James smiled slightly. Because auditors see what managers show them. But when I check in as a regular guest, I see how people really treat guests when they think no one important is watching. I see who gets questioned and who doesn't. I see which staff members are genuinely kind and which ones fake it for supervisors. You can't audit for character. You have to witness it. That makes sense, Sarah said. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're the owner. A lot of companies would have just covered this up. Some companies would, James agreed. But I didn't buy into this chain to perpetuate discrimination. I bought in to create places where everyone feels welcome. Yesterday showed me we're not there yet, but we're gonna get there. On his last night in Chicago, James sat in his hotel room, the same room that Richard Thornton had tried to deny him, and wrote an email to all Grandview Hotel's employees. Dear team, wait, by now many of you have heard about the incident at our Chicago property. I want to address it directly. I am James Chen, Managing Director of Chen Holdings, the majority owner of Grandview Hotels. Several times per year, I check into our properties incognito to observe operations and experience our hotels as guests do. On this visit, I was profiled, questioned without cause, and ultimately had the police called on me by a manager who decided I didn't look like I belonged. This incident wasn't about me. I have resources, power, and the ability to address discrimination when I face it. But most guests don't, and the fact that this happened to me means it has happened to countless others who had no recourse. We pride ourselves on luxury hospitality, but luxury isn't just thread counts and marble floors. It's dignity, it's respect. It's treating every guest like they belong, regardless of their race, appearance, or presentation. Moving forward, we're implementing several changes. E1. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for all management. EB2. Anonymous reporting systems for staff who witness discriminatory behavior. 3. Regular secret shopper programs to audit guest treatment. 4. Zero tolerance for managers who profile guests. If you witness discrimination at any Grandview property, report it. You will be protected. If you engage in discrimination, you will be terminated. We can do better. We will do better. Sincerely, James Chen. He sent the email and closed his laptop. The next morning, he checked out. Sarah handled his departure professionally, warmly. Mr. Chen, on behalf of the entire staff, thank you for giving us the opportunity to improve, and thank you for handling yesterday with such grace. Thank you for the excellent service, James said. I hope my next visit will be entirely unremarkable, in the best way. He walked out of the Grandview Plaza, carrying his worn leather backpack, wearing jeans and a polo shirt, looking exactly as he had when he'd checked in. But this time, everyone in the lobby knew who he was, and more importantly, they knew what he stood for. 6 months later, Richard Thornton sat in his small apartment in a suburb of Chicago, scrolling through job listings. He'd applied to 23 hotel management positions. He'd gotten exactly 0 interviews. Word had spread. The videos had been seen by millions. His name was now permanently associated with discrimination, with abuse of power, with being the manager who called the police on the owner of his own hotel chain. He'd tried to explain in applications. It was a misunderstanding. I was following security protocols. I didn't know who he was. But potential employers all asked the same question. Why did you think he was a security risk? What did he do that was suspicious? And Richard had no good answer, because the truth was nothing. James Chen had done nothing suspicious. He'd simply existed while Asian, while dressed casually, while not fitting Richard's narrow view of what wealth looked like. Richard had lost everything, his job, his reputation, his career, because he'd made assumptions based on appearance, because he'd wielded his small amount of power carelessly, cruelly, because he'd never stopped to think that the man he was humiliating might be the man who controlled his future. Meanwhile, James Chen continued his incognito visits to Grandview properties. He stayed at the Seattle location, the Miami location, the Boston location. He checked in under his real name, dressed casually, carried his worn backpack. And in every location, he was treated with dignity. Not because staff recognized him, most didn't, even with the videos and news coverage, but because the culture had changed. The training had worked, the message had spread. Treat every guest with respect, because you never know who they might be. But more importantly, because it's the right thing to do, regardless of who they are. James never publicly gloated about Richard Thornton's firing. He never mentioned it in interviews. When asked about the incident, he always redirected to the systemic issues. One manager losing his job doesn't fix the problem, he'd say. The problem is cultural. It's assuming that wealth looks a certain way, that certain people belong in certain spaces while others don't. It's the casual discrimination that happens thousands of times a day in hotels, restaurants, stores, banks. We're working to fix that culture in our properties, but every company, every institution needs to do the same work. The Grandview Hotels chain saw a measurable improvement in guest satisfaction scores, particularly among guests of color. The Secret Shopper program identified and removed 3 more managers who were profiling guests. Staff morale improved as employees felt empowered to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. And James Chen, who could have revealed his identity, immediately and humiliated Richard Thornton from the start, had instead chosen to let the manager dig his own grave, to let the police realize their mistake, to let corporate handle it professionally, to let the consequences unfold naturally. Because power, real power, doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to threaten or intimidate. It just needs to wait for the truth to emerge. And sometimes the most devastating response to discrimination isn't anger or confrontation. It's patience, documentation, letting someone reveal who they really are, and then, calmly, showing them exactly who you've been all along. He walked into a lobby wearing jeans and carrying a backpack. Just another guest checking in. But the manager took one look and decided he didn't belong, decided he looked suspicious, decided he needed to be questioned, controlled, removed. The manager never asked his name, never looked at his reservation, never considered that assumptions can be deadly. He just saw what he wanted to see, someone who didn't fit his narrow definition of who belonged at a luxury hotel. So he questioned. He escalated, he grabbed, he called the police. And the guest stood there, calm and composed, making one quiet phone call while the manager smirked, convinced he was right. Then corporate called. Then the police received new instructions. Then the truth emerged in a wave of horror that swept through the lobby like a flood. The guest wasn't just any guest. He was the owner, the majority shareholder, the man who controlled the entire chain, the man who did incognito visits specifically to see how people treated guests they thought were powerless. The manager's authority evaporated in seconds. His career ended before he could make excuses, his reputation destroyed by videos viewed millions of times. all because he profiled someone based on appearance and never bothered to ask who they might be. But here's the real lesson. It shouldn't have mattered who the guest was, rich or poor, owner or nobody, Asian, black, white, Latino. Every person who checks into a hotel, who walks into a store, who exists in a space deserves to be treated with dignity. The manager lost everything not just because he discriminated against the owner. He lost everything because he was the kind of person who would discriminate against anyone who didn't fit his prejudices. And when you wield power carelessly, when you make assumptions based on appearance, when you abuse your authority to control people you think are beneath you, eventually you'll do it to the wrong person. Eventually, the person you're humiliating will turn out to be the person who decides your fate. And by then, it's far too late. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been profiled, if you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've ever been judged by people who knew nothing about you, hit that like button. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that discrimination has consequences, that power can wear jeans, and that the person you underestimate might be the one who controls everything. Subscribe for more stories about assumptions destroyed, about arrogance punished, and about the moment when someone learns too late that respect should be given freely, not just to people who look like they deserve it. Remember, treat everyone with dignity, because you never know who they might be, and more importantly, because everyone deserves dignity regardless of who they are.